Ho, ho, ho. Welcome to Tech Takeaways Christmas Special. I'm your host, Jason Fitzgerald, and I'm joined as ever by my Christmassy co-host, Paul Stringfellow.
Ho, ho.
And my dynamic non-Christmassy co-host, Wayne Miller.
Boo.
Boo. So this is episode 2 of our look back to 2023. So if you've not yet seen episode 1, skip back, go watch that. It's unmissable. And then come back. So in the last episode, we were talking about cost optimization with cloud.
Yeah.
And a lot of cybersecurity as well. And Paul, we wanted to get your kind of reflection back on 2023 as a year, and how have you found the year? What are the key things that stand out to you?
Well, it's been a year where I've got to work with Wayne, so clearly it's been a blast. Was that convincing?
Non-stop fun.
Yeah. It's been a laugh.
That's the vibe I got there.
So, heck, we haven't even opened the bottles of beer yet. I mean, it's all going to go downhill from here. But I think the thing for me, and it was interesting in the last episode that we talked about things like security, cost optimization. Yeah. And the thing that was kind of going through my head all the time is that the more things change, the more they stay the same. And I think one of the things that we've seen this year has been that's also remained true of data. So, we are a company who probably for the last 15 years has talked to our customers an awful lot about data, from where you store it, how you protect it, how you move it around, increasingly how you make sure it remains secure, compliant, how you govern it, and all of those kind of things. And all of those kind of things have remained true, and I think as we get to the end of this episode with a spoiler of looking forward, I think we're going to see that we might even see more of that. On one of our previous episodes, actually, when we had Grant on from NetApp, one of the things he talked about was that idea of increasingly, as people move data to the cloud, as people look at AI, machine learning, that actually lots of the things that we have traditionally talked about around terms of data management, the idea of garbage in, garbage out, those things have become back to the forefront, where maybe they weren't the cool things to talk about for the last 2-3 years, but actually the idea that, well, can I clone copies of data? Does anybody use the data I've got? Is this data relevant if I'm going to feed it into something to use it? If we're going to be making decisions based on this data and building useful business information and business analytics from it, are all those things true? So I think that's been a really interesting thing. And I think one of the things that we've seen, there's kind of been one of the things I think that's been relatively new to you, Wayne, because your background hasn't been data, has been this idea of just how do we find out all this stuff that we've got? How do we find out what's useful? And I think that's something that's been new to you.
Well, there's two things for me. One is, and again, going back to discovery calls, was people have a system or a solution that backs up data. But when we kind of dug a little bit deeper, we were looking at how they back up data, where that data is. Yeah. And then, a new phrase for me was immutable data. So that data, is immutable and is protected for a window. And we've seen instances the past 12 months where we wish people had immutable backups because they couldn't have been compromised. And, from what I've learned as well from ransomware, that's the first target.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that people are starting to pay more attention to data as a valuable business asset. And immutability with backups plays a massive part with that. When we're talking about backups, ultimately we're storing a load of files into a backup file. And if that backup file can be amended or deleted, that's an issue, because we're seeing ransomware attacks whereby it's actually the backup files that are get targeted first, strip them out or age them out, which is disabling the backup system in such a way whereby all the backup files drop out of the backup chain. Ultimately, it gives the business no recovery points. If that happens, and it means that the business is then more likely to pay any kind of extortion demand from cyber criminals in an attempt to get that back. So immutability is that concept of once it's written, it can't then be amended, it can't be deleted. It's secure. That collection of files that we're relying on to essentially as a recovery point for the business should we need it. They're safe, they're protected. So immutabilities, we've worked on a number of those projects this year, actually. And the reason for that is not only is the focus on it from the business, because there's more of an appreciation for attacks, it's being asked for by insurance as well. Do you have an off-site immutable backup? we've had customers come to us and say, we are offsetting backups, but are they immutable? What is immutability? So we've been able to put that in and help our customers that way.
Well, I mean, I didn't know what that was until, we delved a little bit deeper. But the other kind of key area for data was just analysing the data and the tools that we've got. Because, we had a call with someone last week. We had, was it 200 terabyte of data? But they reckon probably only less than 5% is what's accessed in the last year. So it's, and they wanted to look at how can they back that up and move it to cloud. So tools that we have that can analyse that data, and you've been doing that for a long time.
And I think it's a really it's interesting, the conversation around immutability, because for people who think they can delete this podcast, you'll find out it's immutable and it will always be there. So just a warning. But I think that kind of thing around analysing data is absolutely true, and has become more true. I think one of the things that we would see was that, when people were buying storage infrastructure in the past, they would look at that and it would be kind of maybe a 5-year process. So they'd buy some storage, everybody would gripe about the cost, you get the cost somewhere you wanted it, you'd buy your 200 terabytes.
Yeah.
5 years' time, about 6 months before the warranty and the support was up, 6 months earlier, you'd start looking at that again and going, well, we'll probably buy 200 plus another 100 this time, and then there'd be the whole cycle again. But one of the things that's changed is, as we've started to adopt cloud, as we've started to see people move to more kind of as a service cost modelling, and it's interesting, we talked about cost kind of in part one of this, that's brought that conversation to the fore much more regularly. So the idea that, well, actually, if I'm going to pay to store this in the cloud, you're not having this conversation once every 5 years, you're having this conversation every month. Do we really need all of this data? As we look at some of the things that, we've talked about, you're talking there about immutability and protecting the right, kind of the crown jewels of the organisation. Because one of the challenges that comes with that is that when you're protecting stuff, if you don't know what you're protecting, you could potentially be spending an awful lot of money in building immutable data stores for stuff that nobody ever bothers about and actually nobody really cares about. And if you lost it tomorrow, it'd have no impact on the business whatsoever. And this is true of security, governance, compliance. You look at data security, you can spend a lot of money in trying to make sure you're securing data. But of course, the issue you come across is it doesn't matter. If you're just securing stuff that's not that important, you're paying for that. You're paying to back it up. You're paying to store it. Increasingly, we're seeing people have concern about the cost of physically running their storage infrastructure. Yeah. Well, if you're storing 70% of the data and nobody's using it, well, you're paying to cool that, you're buying it, you're paying to cool it, you're paying to, power it, and all of that has cost. So actually, that whole thing around cost management has so many areas that can impact a business.
And it's interesting, actually. Earlier, you mentioned the previous episodes that we did with Grant Cayley from NetApp, and a lot of the technologies that are built into NetApp support the working with larger data sets in quite an efficient way. So if we look at AI and machine learning models, for example, they take millions and millions of files, a working set, to be able to learn what it is that they're trying to learn. So if we look at images, for example, so being able to recognize a picture of a car, for example, that takes millions and millions of pictures of cars to be able to train that model. So if you've got a developer that has got, let's say 10 million pictures of a car, that has a cost to it of storing that data, heating and cooling of the storage system, and maintenance on it as well. But then if you've got another developer that's doing something slightly different with cars, being able to recognize, the size of tires on cars as opposed to the make and model, for example, then what we can do with NetApp is actually flex clone that data at no cost. So we're not paying to store it twice. We're being able to leverage the same data, but in a really efficient way. And I think that the more that I think companies are starting to realize this more and more, that companies that leverage data that they've already written into their storage system, they can gain a big competitive advantage. So companies that recognize data as an asset and can mine business advantages from it.
Well, I think this comes back to kind of what your original question was that I skillfully avoided answering, was about building and understanding that data. And you're absolutely right. The starting point for all of this, whether it's what are we going to use for analytics, what are we going to protect, what do we need to back up, all those kind of things actually starts with doing a piece of work that says, well, if I've got 200 terabytes, what's in it?
Yeah, understand it first.
Does anybody use it? is there anything that's extra sensitive in there that we need to worry about? Is there stuff that we shouldn't even have?
Absolutely.
And there's lots of tools out there, and of course, you can, come and talk to us about. We can point you in the right direction, and whether that's on-prem, in the cloud, bit of both. There's tools there that can help you build that understanding. And what I'm going to do is nicely segue that onto, as things we've seen in 2023, that where data is going to be really important, I think, in 2024 is probably the thing that's going to be the big trend. Now, some of these things will stay the same, cybersecurity we've talked about, but I suppose the thing that maybe took us by surprise in 2023 that is probably going to be the big conversation in 2024 has been kind of the commoditisation of AI. Most people looking at things like ChatGPT, but just in general, the pace of adoption of those technologies. Is that... Yeah, I mean, do you think anything else is going to be the hotter topic of 2024?
Not as hot as AI. I mean, it's coming into everything. Absolutely everything. If we look at the way Office works now, Microsoft Office has been pretty much, the same with a few graphical tweaks for a few years. If you look at what Microsoft are planning with integrating AI into that tool set with Copilot, it's a game changer. Even if we just look outside of Office and we look at the Microsoft Defender security stack, Microsoft are bringing in AI capabilities into there to allow security researchers to do a lot more, to give them insights, to be able to recognize risk within the infrastructure and within the business. So I think that we're going to see a sprinkling of AI everywhere you look. It's going to be really interesting to see what new applications we see, new applications of AI, and how that is going to progress next year. I mean, that is just moved so quickly.
Well, you mentioned a couple of podcasts ago about a Copilot AI being in a Teams meeting and summarising, taking notes, and sending actions. And if I look at the two, where I spend most of my time, it's spreadsheets and probably Teams meetings. And you may have told me something yesterday, or someone did, about Excel. Copilot of Excel. Just tell it what you need it to do, and it'll do it. And I'm thinking, that's going to have a massive impact on what I do. So they're two benefits for me. And then, ChatGPT, everyone I speak to now has been using it in some capacity.
And I think that's, Jason kind of alluded to it there. And I think that's the thing that we will see maybe change most. Now, I'm really, like I say, we kind of talked about Copilot a couple of episodes back, but, I'm really interested to see what the kind of the baking of generative AI in general, but the baking of that kind of technology into everyday applications is going to do and is going to change. And I think it's come with presenting new challenges to people as well. We've just been talking about data. If you're going to feed generative AI models, you were talking about before, Jason, if you're going to feed those models, and you need to make sure the data is the right data that you're feeding them with to try and remove bias and all those kind of things. But actually, I think in general, what we'll see, be really interesting to see how that starts to, because there's some limitations around using Copilot in Microsoft at the moment, certainly none more so than the cost and the amount of users you need to have to access it today. But that'll change over time, and you're already seeing it kind of just baked into day-to-day stuff. But you already see that to an extent. There's lots of things that we don't realise that AI... So I was listening to a podcast a couple of weeks back, and they were talking about Grammarly. And I use Grammarly a lot.
Podcasts.
Apparently so. Obviously not as good as this one, but they were talking about Grammarly. Because you don't even think about one of the things Grammarly is doing is learning about how you write and how people write in general to guide you to, and that's just this kind of stuff is embedded in. But I think going to present a whole bunch of new challenges that we're going to see in 2024. But interestingly, things that all encompass what we've been talking about over these couple of episodes. Security. We were talking about off air, weren't we, about, companies who have put all of their intellectual property into ChatGPT, and ChatGPT's then taken that away and started giving that answer to other people.
Is that what it does? Oh dear.
I think that's where AI will change next year. I think that there will be a lot more governance on the way that AI companies are allowed to develop at a government level. And I think that there will be mechanisms introduced whereby companies can start to introduce their intellectual property into like a secure enclave, so that if you ask it an engineering question, it's not going to then go and leak it to your competitor, as we've seen with ChatGPT over this year.
Well, I think you see it already, don't you? Because if you do the paid-for version of ChatGPT, then you've got some more control.
Right. Okay.
But also one of the things that, and I think we mentioned on the Microsoft podcast about, and I went down to Envision, talked about Copilot, that, for example, if you go onto Bing as a search engine, and you can stop laughing, but if you go onto Bing, so Bing has a capability called Bing Chat, and Bing Chat is powered by GPT-4. Obviously, Microsoft have got a big stake in OpenAI, which, as we're recording this, now includes the guy who was the chief exec of OpenAI, now works for Microsoft. But actually, that kind of capability is, again, makes it more straightforward. But there is a version for people who use Microsoft 365 of Bing Enterprise. So you can then go into Bing Chat Enterprise, and it has that firewall around it. So it doesn't take what you type into there to feed the GPT learning model. It's your data, stays your data. So it'll do its AI piece to give you the answer you're looking for, but it doesn't then take the information you've fed it. So even little things like that will be a big part of that. But I think unless there's anything else that you think is going to run alongside that, I think cybersecurity will remain a thing. Cost optimization is definitely going to remain a thing. Managing data is going to remain a thing. But I think lots of these things will kind of feed into, for many companies, that AI conversation. We want to use that technology. How do we use it safely and securely? But I suppose we wrap up. Is there anything else that you guys think we might see this coming year?
You touched on it just then, but governance of AI in general, isn't it? You need an AI policy, don't you? I'm freely putting information into AI about what we're doing and rewriting from a marketing perspective, but because other companies are doing a lot more than that. And we're talking to people at the minute who are building business models to help companies about governance of how people use AI. That's the big thing, I think. Well, not the big thing, but controlling how it's used.
I think we're going to have an awful lot of chats about AI and probably some podcasts.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if we do a lot of AI episodes next year, just based essentially on what we've just crystal balled.
To be fair, Jace, it gets the hits and it gets the viewers, so we'll probably be doing that because we're that basic when it comes down to it. So, I just thought that before we wrapped up, being as this is the last episode of the year, it will probably be wrong of us to not thank everybody who's spent time subscribing and watching the show, and to wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. And also actually to the team here at the Liverpool Podcast Studio who've looked after us since we started doing these shows back in April.
Well done. Thank you.
They make our lives very easy. We literally rock up, we do this stuff, then these guys make it look professional and us competent, which is
and to Josh, when Josh said he would come on and say hello on one of the episodes,
maybe
next year.
We can't go to the end of a Christmas episode and not thank Josh for the absolute sterling work he's done all year for us. He makes us look like rock stars.
Yes, it certainly makes me look competent, just about. So, but we'll be using AI to improve my competency level next year. So I thought it would be wrong of us not to thank everybody for spending their time watching us this year, and we'll see you all again next year.
Quite right, yeah. So if you've not subscribed, hit the subscribe button. Have a great Christmas and a Happy New Year.
All the best.
All the best.